is absolutely fascinating, Mick, because my first time I threw up too. I
Well,
mean,
and
that
then
roller
after
coaster
that,
was too fast.
after you throw up is when it gets really awesome, right?
Right.
Yeah,
No,
same for me. Same for me.
Yeah, I mean, roller coasters. Am I right, Audra?
Yeah, I got to ride some roller coasters during DEF CON.
Did you?
Did you
Tell
ride?
us more, and how are you still alive?
Yeah, I went to Circus and rode
Wow.
On purpose, or did you
on purpose. I
like
went with
accidental?
Tony Iacobelli at Splunk. He loves roller
Because
coasters.
there's a roller coaster there and Tony has a death wish for wooden
He knows
contraption.
everything about roller coasters. He knows like the
It doesn't make them
velocity,
any more safe.
how they're built. They're actually very safe.
Tell me more about the philosophy. Is it Kantian? Is it utilitarianism? What is the philosophical genesis of a good roller coaster?
Philosophy of fun.
Confucian?
It's just the philosophy of fun.
Philosophy of fun.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that 1970s hippie book to read. That'll be art, motorcycle maintenance, and the roller coaster maintenance and the art of having fun by Tony.
Yeah, we went and rode roller coasters. We saw the Barbie movie. It was a lot of fun. So DEF CON was fun too, but
mostly the roller coasters.
Mostly the roller coasters, yeah.
And the Tiki Bar.
Tiki Bar.
Yeah, we did go to Tiki Bar. So good times.
Tiki. I see, yeah.
Yes.
Important. Make sure for the guests who are pinging me right now. Welcome to Coffee Talk with Serge. I'm Ryan Kovar. This is Audra Streetman, and this is Mick Baccio, or as he likes to be known, Mick Baccio, I believe, is your preferred pronunciation by people who don't know you. We're going to talk about 45, 50-ish minutes. We got some great subjects to go over. I already see some people putting in some chats, so if you're watching, if you want to participate, please do. Joe, I don't think LinkedIn are pests, but if you've heard that, it was probably Mick, and I blame him. So there we go. I think we have some news to start off with, though, correct? Is that we normally do news. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go for it. Let's run the news clip.
Cool.
All right. Well, we have some vulnerabilities to talk about to start with.
My father never loved me, but I think I've really been working through that.
A moment of true vulnerability. Thanks, Ryan. But we have some actual vulnerabilities to get to. So.
Look at you gatekeeping vulnerabilities.
Okay, just kidding. Ivanti. We talked about this one of the coffee talks recently, but there's more vulnerabilities to cover. So if you're not familiar, Ivanti is a provider of mobile device management solutions. And yesterday, the company warned about another 0 day, this time in its Sentry security product. This has a 9.8 out of 10 CVSS score. It's critical, but Ivanti says only a limited number of customers are impacted. But there's also several stack-based buffer overflow vulnerabilities in Ivanti Avalanche, which is another software they provide, which is reportedly used by 30,000 organizations. So that's quite a lot more than just a limited scope, right, in terms of who's affected. And there is an update for the Avalanche vulnerability, and then they also released scripts for each version of the Sentry product to address this latest 0 day. So that's just one of them. I also want to talk about Citrix because, it's critical vulnerability. We have a Citrix one to get to as well. So this one is in ShareFile. It's being actively exploited. This is from the Hacker News. CISA is warning customers to patch this ASAP. And then the NCC group also reports that nearly 2,000 Citrix NetScaler instances have been compromised as part of a large-scale attack. And there's also a code injection vulnerability with Citrix NetScalers that were used to drop web shells on the vulnerable NetScalers. So even if you've patched the NetScalers, you should still check in case you were compromised and there's a backdoor on your device. So those are just a few of the critical vulnerabilities to watch out for. Did I freeze or something? No,
it's just we could have been playing replay from 2010, 2015, 2022.
Literally a month ago, less than a month ago. I feel like we talked about both of these.
We did, yeah. CV 2023 35082, I think, and 078.
Well, act like you've got those memorized and not reading them from the script. It's
Listen.
Yeah.
I've done my
do
research.
that when
I've
there's
done my
only-
research about these AV vaccines, and I have questions.
Remember when CVEs were only 4 digits, and that was it? Like
That's
how long
right,
for those days?
I think this summer said "Hold my beer."
Yeah. I think if you are an Ivanti customer, you are well aware, or you're kind of like shields more up now. I'm not really sure. This is what you're doing. You can't be. You're already looking at all of your devices, looking at the product itself. So with a new 0-day introduced, I feel bad for the security teams out there. Like it's a lot, and even now piling onto that. And with Citrix, I feel it's hot Citrix summer.
That's hard to say. I feel like if you say that too many times, you might say something else on accident.
It's something else.
What? Never.
Give it a call.
Laura's
Never.
asking if we're scripted. No, this is all authentic, off the cuff.
Lara, yeah, we're never.
I don't even know what
No.
news stories you're going to talk about. We just click the link.
We just randomly pick stories. No, we do
There we
meet
go.
before this to try to figure out what we want to talk about.
Let's be very clear here, okay? Audra
Audra
does
tries to-
all the work. She does an incredible job, and then Mick and I go through, we give some feedback, but the reality is Audra is the brain behind the operation. We all know that. So
when the two of us are replaced by AI generated versions, or even Muppets mayhaps, but
AI is not funny, so that would be
not funny yet.
not
It's
funny yet.
haha,
When
not
AI
funny.
becomes funny, then you two will probably need to watch out. But until then, just kidding.
we have some folks here. We have Rana from Liberia, which is awesome. I don't think we've had someone from there. Harrison, I'm not sure what cat feces is about, but it's something you often find in litter boxes. So there you go. Good to know. And LinkedIn user, you don't fall. Gravity is counteracted by centripetal. Okay, so Tony, we know your handle. Good to know. Appreciate Tony chiming in. So there we go.
Is it centripetal or centrifugal?
I believe it's a human centipede. Bill?
Centrifugal force.
That's when
I
you go
guess
from
I've been saying that
roller
wrong.
coaster to roller coaster. I believe that is, yeah.
It's bumper coaster.
Shall we move on?
What? Listen, the reason we're kind of, I remember 2017, I think 2018, U.S. government released something around basically SSL providers or SSL VPNs, anything that is externally facing, right? Like you just have to be on that 100%. So for people who deal with this every day, like Mick said, like if you have a mobile iron / Ivanti, which still sounds like a European DJ for a techno summer festival in Switzerland every hour time. Ivanti. My general thought here is like, I hope you've done a threat model. Sorry, shared DeGrippo. I'm going to say threat model. And I hope you just have a lot of alerts and you've really focused anything external that has users that can come in or authenticate. Like, sweet Jesus, have that locked down. Be looking for vulnerabilities. This is a perfect area for zero trust if you're able to do it. So
yeah, 100%. Look at MITRE's framework for your crown jewels assessment, and like, hey, if this breaks, what happens next? And your externally facing thing should always be at the top of that list.
Especially if it's
preach it, brother Mick.
A file sharing appliance, then you'll definitely want to watch for those. Because
if you're going to use a file share, use VirusTotal like the rest of us. It's free. You can upload whatever you want. You can get access to it, and it's powered by Google, so it's easy to search. And if you lose it,
get recognized in the comments section.
Yeah, exactly. That happens.
Okay, moving on. We are going to talk about space now, outer space. So the FBI, the Office of Special Investigations, and then also the UK NCSC put out this advisory warning about foreign intelligence threats to the US space industry. And so this states that, data and intellectual property belonging to space companies could be at risk from either attempts to break into their networks or also through moles who are placed in the company to gather IP, or the supply chain perhaps leading to the space companies. And it basically, to me, this stood out because it highlights how the commercial space industry has really become integral to the US economy and US national security. And we should also consider space and our assets in space as the final frontier, but also when we talk about cyber threats to infrastructure, right? Critical infrastructure, we should include space into that, especially if there is intelligence that, countries are beginning to spy and try to gather intellectual property on that. So,
Wouldn't
and
it
this
be outer
also,
structure?
this what?
Wouldn't it be outer structure? Like it's space, so like it couldn't be infrastructure. Infra implies
Critical
I
in.
guess that's a very Earth-centric view.
extra
Personally,
structure.
I'm a galactic kind of
Well, I'm going to
person.
check my
So
planet biases, and I feel
yeah, please
Critical
do.
extra structure. I like
Extra
that.
structure. Well,
Yeah.
we do have a subject matter expert we're going to have on for Splunk interviews here in a bit. So I'm not sure if Ducky, if you're watching, but those are some questions
I
for
guess
you.
you've been recruited.
You've been recruited, Ducky. So future Splunk one-on-one interview, we're going to have a person who has a passionate interest in space malware, which is the coolest thing I've ever heard, as I said it out loud. But no,
Hey,
it's
space malware. Last time we saw space malware, Sigourney Weaver exterminated a whole race of aliens. So
that's nice.
It also kind of reminds me, the reliance with U.S. national security. There was an article that just came out yesterday by Ronan Farrow about SpaceX and Elon Musk, and basically the dependency of the U.S. government on these private companies like SpaceX or Starlink, Tesla, in terms of just reliance. It was an interesting article. I highly recommend people read it if they haven't yet, because it kind of underscored. I think there was a quote that I put somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. It says, "There is little precedent for a civilian becoming the arbiter of a war between nations in such a granular way, or for the degree of dependency that the U.S. now has on Musk in a variety of fields, from the future of energy and transportation to the exploration of space." Not related to space cybersecurity necessarily, but when we talk about the war in Ukraine, that was a huge factor, was providing Starlink devices to Ukraine to help with their communication infrastructure. And Starlink is part of space assets, right? That's a space asset. It's not, U.S. owned, but it's privatized, and that should be kind of grouped in as critical infrastructure, right? Wouldn't you say?
I mean, if I was Mr. Musk, I might be looking very carefully at Henry Ford in 1939, 1940, and how by 1942 the U.S. car manufacturing got nationalized and went from building cars to building B-24 bombers. It's a fascinating thing when you have one person who controls so much of something that the U.S. government depends on. And your point is exactly right, Audra. Like we look at, Elon Musk was directly having to think about, like, if I provide this, am I now in scope for rules of engagement for Russian cyber warfare or kinetic warfare? I mean, Russia is one of the probably 5 or 6 countries that could actively target or destroy satellites in space. It's a funny world.
I think what we're seeing is that there is an addition to the military-industrial complex. Like there's a new seat at the table, and it belongs to companies like Starlink, SpaceX. But I think globally we're seeing companies going into a nation or a country and giving assets in return for influence isn't really new. I think we're just seeing it at an accelerated scale, or seeing it in countries we're not used to seeing it. But it's been going on for a long time, especially when you look at things like the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah.
A lot of what's been done in that area is exactly kind of this.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of historical precedents. I mean, that's something that I've really been blown away by in the last 2 years. I noticed we have a Ukrainian here. When you look at the Russian-Ukraine conflict, or the invasion, frankly, when you look at nation-sponsored or sheltered ransomware, right? Like there's a lot of parallels to the 19th century, 18th century, where you can start extracting lessons learned. And so the idea of private industry taking advantage of governmental funding, or like we can look back to Henry Cabot in like 1497 or other timeframes where we think about this and think, okay, government sponsors funds exploration, and then private industry backfills to actually explode it once it's been proven viable. And then you run into the problem of private industry now runs into other governments and other government needs, and now you have privateers in the Caribbean with a multi-billion-dollar franchise 200 years later.
Caribbean? What? That seems very far away for that.
Here we go. Anyway, the point here is watch out for space malware. It's really cool.
Yeah. We talk about Turla too as a group that's some of their exploits involve satellite communication. So I'll be interested to see if we see more of that in the future of, adversaries leveraging space satellites somehow in their attacks.
It's something I always wonder about. Is it also an area where, I don't want to say a gendered term of gentleman's agreement, but personal agreement of, we all know that space is something we all depend upon. And if you start messing up satellites with cyber, and satellites start, like the problem with Starlink, as much as I love the concept, is it does create a lot of stuff in the sky near Earth orbit. And if you start having things crash together and go around, like that turns into a global concern.
Yeah.
I also don't think a lot of folks realize how much stuff is already there.
Yeah.
Like, we're making our own little asteroid belt around Earth because of all the dead satellites.
Well, do you remember like a couple of years ago, there was a unannounced Russian ASAT test, which is an anti-satellite missile, and they launched it into space without anyone knowing, at least not publicly.
Audra, you're confusing this with their recent lunar lander.
Oh, well, that was a little bit more recent. This was a couple years ago. There was an ASAT test, and it left all this debris in space, and there was a lot of concern of it colliding with the International Space Station, and it actually was could have potentially been life-threatening. So that's kind of scary.
I think it's horrible. I think it's going to get really, like, something bad is going to happen. You can't just keep launching stuff into the sky till you can't see it and leave it there.
The first cybercrime was actually like a CFAA stalkerware, right? Where an astronaut on the ISS actually hacked into her spouse's email to figure out stuff around custody or something. There we go. Space malware. So for the person, Samula, I hope I got that name right. What's the topic? We're talking about malware in space. Pretty into it. And Renell, we do deep dives. We're deep diving a little bit here, but we do have a whole segment at the end just for deep dives. So stand by. But speaking of, Audra, what else do we have?
Well, staying on the Starlink Elon Musk topic, with Tesla, we actually have a story about an insider threat investigation. This was 75,000 employees who had their personal information, including social security numbers, leaked to a German newspaper. And this is Tesla launched an investigation. They found that 2 employees at Tesla, they believe, are responsible for leaking this information to the newspaper. And the newspaper actually reported that the PII that they collected included Musk's social security number. So the media outlet is not going to publish this because they said that that's not part of what they plan to do with this. But still, Tesla is pursuing a breach notice. They filed with the Maine's Attorney General's office about this. So I just thought that was interesting that they investigated it. They were able to pinpoint 2 people they believe are responsible. And it just kind of highlights insider threat as an example of a story that we're covering. I don't know that we've covered many insider threat stories.
We haven't. It's internal threat is one of those things, insider threat. I mean, when I had a real job, and President Obama said, like, hey, everyone has to have an insider threat program in the U.S. government, post Snowden, post the other person. Yeah. We looked at it. We were running a nation-state threat hunting team, and they said, great, y'all are the closest to what an insider threat team would look like. And we had to say, like, oh, we'll need about 10 times more people and a lot more budget because it's such a pernicious problem. It's all your traditional safeguards assume, let's stop them as soon as possible. Let's stop them at the beaches. Let's stop them at the ocean. Not, oh, they're living in my village. What do I do, right? Like, my castle is here. They have access to the castle. They're allowed to come inside the castle. There's just a couple rooms that we'd kind of prefer they didn't go into.
Yeah, I remember back at my time at HHS, I was working with a cat named Anthony Cusano, and his job was to build an insider threat program for the Department of Health and Human Services. So you can imagine the scope of something that large. And then,
for those who don't know, that's like the second largest, or arguably the largest.
The budget, right? Yeah. I think it's like out of every tax dollar, 25 cents goes to HHS, whether that's CDC, NIH, FDA, CMS, all those optives underneath it. But HHS is a huge component.
Yeah.
One of the big problems I remember specifically was, hey, when there's an emergency somewhere in the world, we spin up doctors. They volunteer, they get emails, they get sent somewhere to help in a relief effort. They need access to all the things, but what if there's a bad egg? And I was like, oh, but they're doctors. No, wait, I would do that if I was a bad guy. So it's those small problems you're continually sorry, Sherry, you're continually having a threat model over and over. So, it happened. Is it Tesla or Tesla?
Tesla.
Tesla. It happened to Tesla, but I think this same scenario can happen anywhere. And yay, German media laws that they can publish anything.
Yeah, which is nice, actually.
Yep. Well, shall we move on to our slides? I think we have a few to get to. The first is the podcast that we have called The Security Detail. And if you haven't heard about this, it's a podcast we launched in June. Each episode is about a different industry. And we actually just released an episode today about the retail and hospitality sector. And we have an interview with the president of the RHISAC, Susie Squire. So she had some great insight on some of the top threats that they are seeing among their members. And so we also released a healthcare episode 2 weeks ago. We have manufacturing, public sector.
Because she won't say it. This is Audra, and this is her, and Kirsty.
I saw you making a face. I was like, what's wrong, Mick?
You
own it. You're crushing it.
It's my podcast.
It's your podcast.
It's mine.
Yeah, you and Kirsty Payne.
Yeah, Kirsty and I co-host it. We just recorded a couple more.
Don't promote yourself a little bit. You do a fantastic job.
Thanks, Mick.
Yeah, for the people wanting a deep dive, this is a perfect example. It's a full hour of a deep dive in a vertical. So
yes,
there you go. So episode 4.
Yep, we have a QR code. It is not malicious, so go ahead and use that and download the podcast. And we're on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, bunch of other places.
Wherever you find all of your major podcasts. We're basically the same as NPR. Wait, don't tell me.
Yes, exactly. So, all right, we can go to the next one. We have a bunch of events coming up, and I don't know that I meant for that bullet to be so far down on the page, but I'll fix that next time.
Well, I think it's just showing the temporal lag.
Yes,
right?
exactly, the temporal lag. Exactly, that was intentional.
That's the name of my band in high school. We are temporal lag.
We have a Boss of the Sock worldwide competition, actually 2 events coming up on August 30th, so just around the corner, 8 a.m., 8 p.m. Pacific. So anywhere in the world you can compete. It's a free blue team themed capture the flag event. A lot of fun. And so that is happening on August 30th. And then Mick, you are speaking at the Billington Cybersecurity Summit. Tell us about that.
It'll be at the Ronald Reagan Building in Washington, D.C. I believe my panel is slated for Thursday, where I'm with some great group of folks, and we're going to be discussing incident reporting, specifically around some of the new rules that are coming out, some of the new regulations that will be coming out in just that process. So looking forward to that. There's going to be a lot of great people there. So if you're around, check it out.
Yep. That'll be fun. Shannon Davis also presenting at 2 events in Australia, B-Sides and the Australian.
James Hodgkinson as well, both on our team.
Oh, yeah, and James Hodgkinson. And this is about a Google Chrome extension project we have. Ryan, I don't know if we're elaborating or if it's top secret.
Yeah, we can hit the highest. Not I hope not. You're going to be horrible at classified material, Audra. Can I talk about this? It is top secret. Let me go
around it.
Let me introduce it.
That we did.
So I have these invasion plans for Iran. Can I talk about that, or what's the TLP on that?
Yep.
But no, Shannon and James have done some great work over the last couple months around looking at every Chrome extension that exists in the market right now, and coming up with a pipeline to actually do analysis of it. So the presentation is basically how you would do this yourself, some of the interesting findings, some of the areas that we see concern, and they've just done some really wonderful work on it. So I hope if you're in Oz and you want to make it down, please do so. It's good stuff. And then David Bianco is talking about peak threat hunting at the Security Onion conference, right? In Augusta. So Augusta, there we go.
Augusta. Where are you going?
Oh yeah, Augusta.
And then Conf in 2024. So ways away, but still scheduled. Mark your calendar. Yes, exactly.
Mark that.
All right.
Date.
And we have one other slide because we don't want to forget we have to promote our newsletter. So if you have not subscribed or signed up for the Surge quarterly newsletter, you can do that. Splunk.com/surge is the website. And this is where we send out a quarterly newsletter. And anytime there's a major security event like SolarWinds or Log4j Scale, we'll send out a rapid response alert if we initiate a rapid response. So that's what you'll get if you sign up for Surge alerts.
LinkedIn user in from the top rope. Conf is June, not July.
Is that true? Did I
It
get
is
that
true.
wrong?
I just verified. Oh my God, we're almost done. Guys, we got to
Well,
get
that
off
whole bullet was just wrong to begin with, and it should have been deleted. So I will update that for the next
the
slide.
system. Oh my God, Audra, how dare you?
Thank you for correcting us on that, because it
So
was
it's been a
July
great
this
run.
year.
Thank you for watching. I'm going to wrap this series
We're just
up.
going to go cry and shame in the back now that we have a
We
month
can't-
left. We're already a month behind, Audra.
I know we can't get anything right, can we? Well, it's fine. We'll
fine.
get it right next show.
Everything's going to be all right.
All right, let's move on now to the charity challenge.
Oh, great. And now, Splunk's Cybersecurity 60-second charity challenge. Remember the rules. You've got to get through an entire subject in 60 seconds, or you donate to today's charity of choice. Good luck!
All right, so we're moving on to quantum computing. So this is a fact sheet that CISA, the NSA, and then also I think the NIST released, basically about the future of quantum computing and recommending that all organizations, especially critical infrastructure, get started now on preparing for the migration to post-quantum cryptographic standards. So this was a fact sheet. It just came out just in the last couple days. And the question for today's charity challenge, and I'll get to the charity, but the question is, what do you make of the future of quantum computing? Is this something that's just on the horizon? Is it decades away? Do you think it might never happen? What's your take on it, and what do you think organizations should do to prepare? And the charity that we have this week is the Maui Strong Fund, which will help with the response and recovery following the devastating wildfires in Maui. So that is the charity for this week. And I want to share a blog too that we have at Splunk that kind of also inspired this, that Kirsty Payne wrote. And Kirsty is a genius, especially on topics like quantum computing. And so she put together this amazing blog that I can understand, and I really appreciate that, just kind of describing what is quantum computing and why should you care. So if you want to read that, that's the link. But who wants to go first with the challenge?
I just can't wait for Kirsty to watch this later and go.
I know.
I'm
hoping she's not watching now, and we're going to get yelled at.
This. I'm so
Why
sorry.
would she yell at us?
Oh,
not you. These two doofuses.
Like, how dare you try to explain something so poorly?
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Nick, I mean, I think I'll let you. It's the reigning 2023 overall champion.
I think I lost last week because there was a rigged vote.
There's a rigged vote. I mean, it sounds like a right vote to me. Fine. Then I will go first. I have a new strategy. Are you ready for this? So every time that I've just mentally prepared but not written out a script, I've done better. Would you two agree with that?
I don't know when you have a script. I can't tell.
So every time that I've won, it's usually unscripted.
All right, well then let's try it. Let's do the unscripted version.
Okay.
So once is a whole data set. Got it.
Like 3 times, bro. 3 times. And we had like a tie once, so I'm going to take like 3.5. All right?
All right, well, let's see if this is 4.5.
I doubt it. Okay, so the general concept here is if you don't understand anything about quantum, first off, read the blogs that Kirsty's writing. I think she's actually has a second one coming out today or tomorrow. Secondly, the general concept is there's a new way of doing computing that has to do with quantum physics. Now, this is pretty complicated, but it has to do with superposition and Schrodinger's cats and a whole bunch of things I'm not 100% sure about. But the general concept is you can do computing thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of times faster than ever before. So when we look at these quantum problems, you're seeing it a lot in the headlines because for the first time, we're starting to have quantum computers that are actually able to do things. But the question really becomes, are these quantum computers actually able to do anything that's interesting? And the answer there is no. They are progressing quickly into things that are good. But unless you're a government that has encrypted material or some sort of organization that at one time thought it had material that's encrypted for tens or hundreds or thousands of years, that's about the only organization that I can think of that needs to actively worry about cryptographic problems today.
That was really good, Ryan. You promised that wasn't scripted? All right.
You see the timer, you talk to the timer.
I talk to the timer. You give me something. Why is he talking like he's giving a speech at a conference? Well, Brit 091. Very cruel, Brit 091.
It's very polished. You sound very polished. So
I am polished.
Compliment.
Damn it.
All right, Mick. On that note.
All right. Let me give it a shot. So let's take a trip down memory lane. Quantum computing is to computing like the Batmobile is to cars, right? Same thing, but just supercharged. Like, remember Mario Brothers, where basically you just went left and right? Some might say that's a binary movement. Like, that's all there was. So quantum computing, basically these qubits can exist in different states, so making them super powerful for the task that Ryan mentioned earlier. But what does that mean to you in your day-to-day? Probably not very much. Remember the Matrix and how Neo could like bend all those different directions? That's basically what qubits do. What does that mean to you day to day? Nothing. Kind of like the Matrix meant nothing to most people because we're just batteries. So quantum computing isn't something that's going to make a direct impact anytime soon. I think the next 10 to 100 years, yeah, maybe, but it's not going to steal the spotlight from anything new that's on our horizon. So quantum computers are like futuristic gadgets from your favorite 90s action movies. They're cool to ponder, but they're not going to shake up how you enjoy taco night.
All right. Well, I'm going to put this to people watching. So, Britt, if you have an opinion on who gave...
we have to be more formal. I'm unsure of genders, so we'll go with the very respectful Brit with 2 T's 091. So would love to hear the feedback. We got some folks on there. We have to vamp a bit because there's like a 2-minute delay before it starts popping up.
Well, yeah, vote in the chat who you think had the better. I like how we're all batteries, Mick. I thought that was a nice touch.
Are we derp batteries? That's really the big question.
Derp batteries.
I mean, some corporations are, right? I mean, there's a couple we talked about earlier that might fall in that bucket.
So Audra, you're still fairly new to cyber, right? We're hitting your 2-year mark here, 2.5 or 3 years, I guess, before you really started diving into cyber, which still incredible. What do you know about cyber, or what do you know about quantum computing in your recent studies?
My knowledge of quantum computing is not from any like serious study. It's been like articles in the Atlantic that I've read, like random stuff, like very high level stuff. But I was familiar with the concept of qubits and, cryptography, breaking, quantum computing. Not all, cryptography is vulnerable to it. And I skimmed over Kirsty's blog as well. I need to read it more in depth.
I mean, you read it in depth as the colleague and copy editor that you are. No, we heard it. Like, you wouldn't recommend something you didn't read and believe in.
Absolutely. I read that very thoroughly. But I think that did a great job of explaining at a high level, what should people, I think, because the takeaway is, what do I need to care about, right, at my organization? And the whole message from CISA is that, we should be creating roadmaps and doing an inventory and, trying to plan ahead. But how many organizations are struggling with focusing on the threats of right now, right? So like when it comes to prioritizing your efforts and your time, I can see that being a challenge to think of something that's not even a threat yet, to prepare for that, whereas you're still trying to get your own current asset inventory together, right?
So what's the thought process, like the next 10 to 100 years, right? 100 years?
There's just no certainty about it. You pull a bunch of experts and...
Would you say that a centenary, a centenary plan, like a 100-year plan, would that be a good idea? I wonder.
Only if you review it every 5 years and make small revisions.
That's a good idea. Someone should look into that.
Just watch out for sparrows and locusts.
I mean, it wouldn't hurt to start educating yourself now on quantum computing, just like it would have been beneficial to start brushing up on large language models, before ChatGPT came out. Right?
That's why I know we're do that. I know we're talking about it a lot, but this blog series, like four total blogs. It actually is like the perfect primer for.
It is, unless you're a precog. You can go back and research this before it becomes a thing.
What I like about it is it really goes into the, like, without going into the math, it explains what impacts a network defender's life. And to your point, like, I think CISA telling government organizations, like, hey, by the way, if you encrypted something with these sort of levels and you thought you were never going to have to worry about it,
100%,
you might need to rethink it. Yes. But if you're an organization that can't patch Ivanti,
then priorities.
Right, that quantum computing, it's going to be, when it happens, it's going to be super bad if, you're cracking something like FIDO2.
Yeah.
Right. When that goes down, oh no, it's going to be a bad day for everyone. And to Google's point, when the article mentioned, rolling something at a scale across the internet. And that's impossible to do, right? Like, how's IPv6 going?
I still hope to retire beforehand.
The interesting point about this too is that it takes a really long time to prepare for post-quantum cryptography because it takes so long to even create the technology to begin with. I feel like maybe that's why there's this big push, is to raise awareness that actually this isn't something you can do last minute. You really do need to think about this in advance. But
Well,
I can also see it not being an afterthought because it's not a reality today.
and like, what's the number one rule of building software is don't roll your own crypto. And like, one of the big things you have to do for this to prepare for a quantum computing world is to evaluate, like, part of the assets isn't just like, what assets do we have, but it's literally like creating an asset inventory list of your cryptographic methods, which I find fascinating. And then saying, these are the ones that are vulnerable to quantum, basically quantum computing. Or
not the asset,
and you have
the encryption.
Quantum safe cryptography or post quantum cryptography. Like, you're going to have to figure that out, and then determine, how do I upgrade or change the encryption methodology that I'm using at this time, or cryptographic methodology. Anyway, I think Kirsty uses a phrase in one of her blogs of cryptographic asset inventory, which is just terrifying to me and the most nerdy thing I've ever heard. But we love her, so we'll let her get away with it.
I don't see any votes in the chat, but I did get a message from Tony who said if there's any way they can both lose, I'd vote that way. So just sharing. Does that mean I won?
Quantum computing will destroy the roller coaster industry. We're going to call an audible here. Drew Church, come off of God mode.
Yes, I don't want to vote.
Sorry, Kovar or Mick wins because the battery comment was too good. But if you had made yours slightly funnier, you would have won by a landslide. So
the value is there. There we go. All right. Well, I'm donating to Maui very happily. Those folks need some help right now, so happy to chip in.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and transition now to our deep dive.
Finally, Renelle. And now we talk about things that just happen to be on our minds with who's ever here, because we made this up before I knew who'd accept my meeting invite.
So for the deep dive today, we're talking about IOCs, cyber threat intelligence, and more specifically, your panel, Mick, that you had at DEF CON this year. This was at the Blue Team Village. And so tell us a little bit about what this panel was about and all the things that you ended up talking about.
So I had the opportunity to moderate the first ever Intel panel at Blue Team Villages here at DEF CON. It was pretty exciting. So thank you, Heather, for giving me a chance. All the staff over there. It was myself. It was Silas Cutler from IST, Lauren Prohl from Marsh McLennan, and Charlie Donay from FSISAC. And the crux of it, what it started off as was, hey, by the time an IOC gets discovered, when a researcher like Silas finds something, and by the time it gets to the end customer of an FSISAC or an ISAC-shaped organization, they generally become stale. So what happens in that process? So it was the three folks I thought that could answer at best the roadblocks they run into, what's worked and what's gotten better. So it was a great discussion. It started from there, but Ryan, you were in the audience. How did it end up?
You did not really talk about IOCs. It was really just the way as we, as threat intel experts, have failed and continue to fail. And I didn't disagree with a lot of statements there. We've talked about this a lot, of the lack of sharing across or how you share. Something I liked, that was very meta joke, as we were in DEF CON, surrounded by people who are just passionate about threat intel and Blue Team, with a panel that's primarily pulled from your personal contacts, and 2 or 3 of the people are in special secret squirrel signal groups that you're on, that I'm on. And part of the big discussion was why threat sharing groups suck, and why they collapse, and why they get too bloated and then have to be reinvented. I think that was something I had a couple people afterwards kind of talk to me about. Someone's been in the industry. They're like, oh, well, I've been trying to get in this threat sharing group for a long time. And like, are you saying it's not worth it? And it's like, no, they are worth it, but they haven't looked worse. And part of it, as we're showing with our gray beards, people change roles, they change jobs. And then those, not to be Thomas Jefferson about, feeding the tree of liberty of IOCs with the blood of the innocent, mixing some metaphors there. There's going to see lamb blood later. Point is,
the cherry tree that got cut down. I remember that guy.
There were rails that were split and a bear was wrestled. I don't know. There's a coonskin cap, I think. But point here is, these threat groups, these sharing groups, eventually turned into social groups. and then people have to diversify again and get back. I don't know. I think probably about 5 to 15 is probably the max you can do before you start getting into bloat.
See, I think for a lot of places, it becomes the relationship with sharing, closed information, not classified, just, TLP, it's like that's a real thing. Sharing information with someone is normally a personal thing. I have to know you personally and have, work with you on something before. And that doesn't scale to organizations, right? So, Audra, let's say you work at place X and we're pals, and I give you a ring and say, hey, I'm seeing something on your network. If you didn't work there, I wouldn't call that organization, right?
Answer us, Audra.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that's fair. I also think like it depends on your use case with IOCs, right? Like, are you investigating potential compromise on your own systems and you're trying to get a better understanding of like attribution, right? Like, that's one use case of like pivoting off IOCs to try to figure out where this is originating from, right? But if you're doing this as like a greater community alert of like, hey, we found this is something. Because how often would you say, Mick, from your experience, that these IOCs are shared from an actual incident investigation, or from a sample that was provided to researchers who write up a report? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think there's a difference there.
In my former life, it was almost always incidents. Now, sorry to answer on your behalf, Mick.
No, because an incident happens at place X. They do the response, their after action report. That after action report gets distributed out to everyone else. Whether that be something like, all the old people out there, something like Snare Daemon, or GFirst Portal, or something like that. It's gotten better, but that's generally how I've seen it happen. If a person finds a sample and writes a blog on it, from a vendor perspective, is the other side of that coin, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think aren't we kind of increasingly hearing about techniques that adversaries are using that they can easily burn their infrastructure? Like, that's becoming increasingly common. Like, I think the snake malware advisory that came out touched on that a little bit, or like China targeting like Soho routers, things like that, where they can easily.
Yeah, well, you can share, like, those aren't necessarily traditional IOCs, right? They're TTPs, but like you can share all that.
IOCs from that, right? Like, if you
Sure.
have information about that actual infrastructure that they were then using to gain access, that doesn't really tell you a whole lot, right? And it also goes back to the pyramid of pain, right? Like, IOCs that are more important than others in terms of like the pain that they cause to adversaries. Like, a hash is very trivial versus, TTPs. So
I think a lot of this has to do with what your role is. Like right now in vendor land, a lot of our conversations are among other, I'm talking to Microsoft, Mick is talking to CrowdStrike. People are sharing information for literally the betterment of the world. But when I worked for an organization, and I would want to share with specific peer organizations that I had some sort of framework with. And then you run into the weird thing of TLP red, which is pretty much TLP pointless. If you're actually following TLP red, there's very little, you can't do anything with it. So
like you can't search your network for activity of that indicator.
You can't put it in your SIM.
If there was an adversary on your network, they would see you running that query and say, oh, they're on to us. To your point, they would see you looking at infrastructure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like TLP red, theoretically, it's just like, if I tell you, it has to stop with you, which informs you. And it's great for intel sharing. It's great for adding, flavor and color to your research.
Actionable. So it becomes worthless for a net defender.
Yep.
Context is amazing, but net defender, at the end of the day, hey, look, is there something I can block? Is there something I can pull out?
Can I look in my Splunk instance for this? No, actually you can't.
No, I prefer you not to.
Yeah. Because people forget, like, it's not only just like external, it is literally people in your team. So if you're a TI person and you're part of a trusted sharing group, and someone else shares something TLP red, theoretically, you can't even tell not theoretically, sorry, by the rules of TLP, if you're adhering to those, you're not even supposed to tell your team member about it. Which, we hit on, or you hit on in the panel a bit, I think, of just, the value of these threat sharing groups and what you can and can't do, and how quickly it becomes, tied down in the, the kind of street warfare that occurs when someone breaches that trust.
Well, I think we saw that last year. We discussed that slightly on the panel. The Slack effort that got stood up by JCDC
Right.
with Ukraine response. It was amazing, and it was the first time I had seen such a free flow of information from private to public sector in that span that quickly and that actionable. And then I believe some TLP violations happened, and people stopped sharing.
Yep. For you, Mick, what were the questions you were most excited to ask on the panel?
So for me, it's you and I have danced this for a long time. The FSISAC, the financial sector ISAC, I think is the top of the food chain when it comes to how an organization is structured, their effectiveness, their membership, what they're able to put out. And the other ISACs, it's not a discredit to them. I think with the funding and just the longevity they've had, they've been able to do such great things. But even then, they have had missteps. They've had information that doesn't get out as fast as it could. And so I'm trying to highlight, when Silas finds something, what's the process for an FSISAC? And Lauren Prohl was a fantastic person to have on the panel as well, because then it becomes a business discussion. We want to implement these changes to make things more secure, but from a business perspective, it costs this much money. It'll take this long. And that's something that rarely gets discussed in our world.
Yeah, I think, IOCs, they can be very granular depending on how they're used or how they're, found or dispersed. And I almost wonder from like an ISAC point of view, I mean, it's one thing to be working in a SOC and getting threat intelligence that way. It's another thing to be part of an ISAC, and maybe you would care more about more broader trends or, advice on your own operations, right? Like advice on how to structure your operations and your maturity journey, right? I think that's a lot of what people get out of ISACs as well, is not just granular intelligence. It's also other advice, if that makes sense. So,
100%, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's that one of the things we discussed was that ISAC becomes that trust community.
right.
If you're not in one, the ISAC becomes that trusted, vetted group. All those members in there are kind of on the same, obviously the same vertical, the same page as you. So it kind of creates that thing that Ryan and I were discussing earlier. And those IOCs will always be useful depending on the maturity of the program. I've spoken to shops where an ISAC threat feed would be an ancillary, in addition to the stuff we create in-house. But I've talked to shops where their sole source of threat intel information comes from an FSISAC or an MSISAC. And I think those are the ones that need the most assistance in kind of getting there. So organizations like the ISAC are super helpful.
So Mick, you talked on this in the panel. You're someone who is maybe a remote worker, maybe you're fairly new to cyber, or maybe you're not, but you just don't have the connections of living in the DC cyber tribe. Like you folks had some really good advice of just how do you begin finding people for that threat sharing, like these secret squirrel groups. Like what was some of the best advice you heard on that from the panel?
I think the best one was make stickers, right? Was make stickers and
what? We never do that.
All right. And then basically troll on main. I think just the interaction with the community. There are discords out there. If you're part of the community, there is a blue team village, red team village. There's a discord for that. There's communities inside that. I think it's just a socialization, that community building is the biggest part of it. And you can do a lot of that remotely.
Yep.
Yeah. I had something I wanted to say, but I think I just forgot it.
Because I interrupted you very rudely, Audra. So
You didn't interrupt me. I didn't say anything. I was like taking a breath.
I was
about to.
I precogged the interruption.
Yeah, I can't think.
We talk about this some people have great things. Like every B-Sides is different. I know you used to be involved in running the B-Sides DC. Our good friend Andy runs B-Sides Nova. Folks here in Dallas, B-Sides DFW, and B-Sides have a wide variety of quality of content and people, in my opinion. But they're also a great place to start facilitating those. Like one thing I like about B-Sides is people are there to meet their tribe. And that's a good place for some of those in-person to start, but you might not get the right vertical. You might not get a threat intel focus. You might not get the it's kind of part of his throwing.
It starts there, right?
Yeah.
It starts somewhere. And I think to your point, those small user conferences are making slight comebacks.
Yep.
What I love about DEF CON is just how big it's gotten, but at the same time, I dislike how big it's gotten. But that sprawl has grown so much that no matter what your aperture is, you can find something that fits it. With a B-Sides conference, you're just getting, this is B-Sides, whatever city you are in.
Yeah.
And while it's fantastic, it might not be entirely, if you're not an AppSec person and it's an all AppSec day, you're just kind of, oh, look, I heard there's bagels. That's about
the
it.
flavor of B-Sides San Francisco is way different than B-Sides DC.
I was messaging Reed the other day, and I said that if you've not been to B-Sides San Francisco, I highly recommend it. It is a fantastic conference. It is completely the opposite of B-Sides DC, or it is just B-Sides San Francisco is a vibe. And I don't say that often because I'm old, but it was such a good time. I recommend it. 10/10, no notes.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say now. Has nothing to do with B-Sides. But if you have IOCs that go stale and you've ingested them, you've put them into your, and you don't have any alerts firing on them, then it's really nothing lost other than, right? Like, wouldn't you rather?
Fairly proudly told me how they have 1.2 million indicators of compromise at every IP ad, and it's like, oh. Second part is, in a cloud world, the temporal aspect of IP address and domains is ephemeral, right? I mean, I think Novetta put out that phenomenal Lazarus report like 8 years ago now, which was a really great piece of work. And they had hundreds of IP addresses, but they were all Amazon AWS IP addresses.
Yes.
And they didn't add the context of the time. And so if you got that report and you're looking at it and trying to say, like, God, were we impacted at all by this?
Why are there Google IPs on this? Why are there Microsoft IP space?
But I can think of a scenario if something is as high profile and impactful, like a Log4j type incident where everyone's scrambling, they're trying to figure this out as fast as possible, to have that information within, a reasonable time frame of that breaking, even if it isn't actually being used currently, it's still better to have just in case, like in those types of scenarios, right? Like I could see the benefit.
Oh,
I don't know. I guess
I tend to be an ISV collector, so I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's.
Oh no, but I think the problem becomes if you're looking for that Log4j type activity, waiting 3 weeks plus to get those indicators from news cycle to processed IOCs in your network, that's the span I think that breaks most people.
Yep. And I also think there's a difference between hunting and alerting. So it might be something where I'm like, okay, yeah, I do have 1 million IP addresses, but maybe I do a search low and slow on cold stuff every month for my entire catalog. And I come up with some sort of mechanism. Because there's, like, for example, there's some adversaries that I've dealt with who love using the same dynamic DNS domains. Like Jumping Crab comes to mind. And for those of you who've dealt with those adversaries, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But like, I could alert off. I've never seen a legitimate use of Jumping Crab domain in my life. And so the subdomain in front of that might be different. But if it has Jumping Crab, I'm like 90% sure that it's this group or associated with this group. So for me, that's a good example of an evergreen sort of thing. There's other domains, there's other IP addresses that I just see, or I have seen consistently over the years that are reused. And then there's other ones to move up. Our producer in the background, Voice of God, Drew Church, said, I feel like David Bianco would hate this conversation, and he must not be watching today. Otherwise, he'd be throwing shade. But like, this is another example, like SSL hashes, for example. Like, those are really great. Like, they have a higher fidelity, and I would keep them a lot longer than maybe an Amazon IP address with no context. But I think IOC management is one thing that is very boring that people do very poorly because
no one talks about it because it is so boring and hard. It's like asset inventory, IOC management.
And now cryptographic asset inventory.
Large bodies within the federal government, they have a hard time with aging out IOCs.
Yeah.
Because it's no longer active in a campaign. Do you just get rid of it, or do you just keep it in the background? And if it fires again, do you alert, even though you know it's not bad anymore? So reused infrastructure could potentially be a thing. So I get it, but not a lot of places are equipped to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's complicated. I feel like I can't really speak to it because I haven't done it. I haven't actually been a
Done it
practitioner
yet.
doing this.
Yet.
Yeah.
But just, just thinking out loud. Yeah.
It's hard.
definitely
It's
complicated.
also political. Like Mick kind of touched on this, but some organizations metricize success by number of blocks or a number of hits. So like if you do something like, hey, we had
Yeah,
a million
50 million alerts today.
Yeah, and you suddenly drop that because you said like, actually, no, we just aged out, all these IOCs because they're low fidelity and no context. And suddenly you go from blocking 1 million cyber bullets a month to 200,000 cyber bullets a month. If you haven't appropriately communicated that to your management, or if you as an organization have determined that your metrics of success is block cyber bullets, you're going to have a bad day. Now, I think you're going to have a bad day if your sophistication level is metricizing cyber bullets, but sometimes you don't have a choice in that, right? Like sometimes that's just the deal that you were given. So
Think of the meme that Justin posted from The Wire. It's just deputy likes dots, and that's if your metrics are here's how many blocks we got at the firewall, then that is your metric.
I've seen it. We've all seen it.
I've done it. So yeah.
But enough about the DoD.
All right. We're running out of time. So
What?
we should probably wrap this up. But it was great talking about IOCs. Maybe we can incorporate that in a future show. I feel like I need to do some more research on this, but
I love it.
yes. All right. Well, I think that's all we needed to get to, right? Any other last words before we...
No, we'll be back next week for a one-on-one interview. We're figuring out who, but we have some great candidates, so we'll advertise that. So join us next week at same time, same place, but for a one-on-one deep dive interview with some sort of personality and interesting human.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, to be determined. But that's all. So
All right.
or missile maps. I have done that as well, Michael.
Pew pew.
Pew pew maps are for the win. Great sound effects. But cool.
All right.
Well,
Well, we'll see you
are we
next
done?
week. I think
Yeah.
so. All right. Bye, everyone.
Take us away, Drew. Surge.